The galaxy before humanity. Long before humans ventured beyond their pale blue world, the galaxy had already seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Empires older than stars stretched across the spiral arms, their power so immense it seemed eternal. The Vela Continuum molded gravity itself into cities, building structures that folded space around their core. The Keth Dominion consumed stars, feeding their vast civilizations with the raw fire of suns. The HFY ascendancy abandoned flesh altogether, existing as floating thought constellations between dimensions, their consciousness scattered across the void. Humanity did not exist on any galactic maps. When they finally appeared, fragile and unremarkable, they were catalogued as category ephemeral, non-threatening. Lifespans measured in centuries were laughable to the ancients who measured existence in millennia. Technology sputtered compared to civilizations that manipulated stars as easily as wind. Politics and borders on a single world seemed petty, even amusing. First contact was brief and dismissive. A Vela observer recorded humans as emotionally unstable, technologically primitive, extinction probability, 97.4%. They were not conquered because they were not worth conquering. Yet humans endured. They traded cautiously, observed carefully, and studied alien technology with a patience no other species possessed. Where other civilizations perfected singular miracles, humans created systems. Where others revered ancient designs, humans iterated endlessly. Curiosity and adaptability became their quiet strength. Meanwhile, the galaxy began to change. Stars, once reliable engines of life, started to fail. Not explode, but fade. Fusion slowed. Entire systems dimmed into cold silence. The HFY detected anomalies in causality. The Keth Dominion lost 3 feeding stars in a century. Vela mathematicians calculated an impossible conclusion. The galaxy itself was unraveling. Still, the ancient empires believed themselves immune. They had survived supernovas, plagues, temporal wars. Entropy could not touch them. Humans, unnoticed and underestimated, began to prepare. They did not understand the full nature of the cosmic threat. They only knew a lesson carried deep in their history. Survival required action, not hope. Entire fleets and colonies were reorganized. Research was accelerated. Skills and strategies were taught across generations. It was not strength that defined humanity. It was persistence. Where empires stagnated in arrogance, humans learned. Where civilizations crumbled in panic, humans adapted. They observed, they recorded, and, most importantly, they refused to vanish. And so, quietly, in the shadows of dying stars and in different empires, humans took their first, careful steps toward becoming more than their fragile beginnings. They could not yet imagine what the universe demanded of them, but even the ancients could not foresee the endurance of a species so underestimated. The galaxy continued to spin, blind to the small, stubborn species on a blue planet at its edge. And yet, it was in that very stubbornness that humanity's first spark of immortality was ignited. The Age of Collapse. The first civilizations to notice the collapse were the ancients themselves, and they were too late. The HFY ascendancy, once a constellation of sentient thought, vanished without a sound. Entire planes of existence collapsed as if reality itself had ripped their foundations away. No bodies remained. No technology, not even the faintest echo of their consciousness. Only a fragment of data drifted into human observation. We have calculated every possible future, except this one. Panic spread across the galaxy. The Keth Dominion, who had once feasted on suns, attempted to harness the accelerating entropy itself. They fed on dying stars, trying to outrun the decay. For a moment, it seemed to work, but their bodies, engineered to endure for millennia, began to fail. Metabolism accelerated uncontrollably, consuming their own flesh and machinery alike. The Keth Dominion was no more. Even the Vela Continuum, masters of folding space and bending gravity, could not escape. Entire regions of their empire were isolated behind recursive gravity shells, meant to protect them from collapse. But isolation bred stagnation. Perfection had frozen them in time, and when their shell finally failed, their cities imploded into singularities. Monuments of genius became tombs of rigidity. Amid this devastation, humanity endured. They lost worlds, billions of lives, but each loss became a lesson. Human colonies were rebuilt, redesigned, relocated. Knowledge was salvaged, adapted, and shared. Refugees from dying species were welcomed. The humans did not view their neighbors as rivals to conquer, but as partners to save, and themselves as custodians of the remnants of the galaxy. Humanity's methods were unorthodox. They did not rely on singular marvels like the ancients. They built systems of systems, networks capable of learning, evolving, and repairing themselves. Starships were modular, capable of adapting to new threats. Colonies were mobile, ready to abandon planets before they succumbed to death. Every failure became a foundation for improvement. It was during this age that humans began to earn respect, not through dominance, but through endurance. Alien leaders, once dismissive, observed the humans' unyielding persistence. A dying Keth admiral, trapped aboard a collapsing station, asked a human commander, "Why help us? You gain nothing." The human answered simply, "You're still here. That's enough." The galaxy was unraveling, but humanity moved with purpose. They did not fully understand the forces at work, but they refused to succumb to despair. In a universe where the strong fell first, humanity survived. In a galaxy where brilliance stagnated, they adapted. And so, in the shadows of dying stars and crumbling civilizations, humans quietly became a force no one had predicted. They were not the strongest. They were not the most advanced. They were not revered. But they were still there, and in a universe that was disappearing, that was everything. The last wars of existence. The galaxy had become a graveyard. Stars flickered and died. Planets turned to ash before the very fabric of reality. Empires had collapsed. Species had vanished. And yet humanity endured. The final threat emerged not from warships or empires, but from the void itself. It was called later by survivors and historians the null tide, a wave of unreality that erased matter, energy, and even memory. Entire systems blinked out, leaving nothing behind, not even gravity to mark their passing. Against this, conventional weapons were meaningless. No fleet could stand. No fortress could resist. Humanity did not retreat. They had learned that survival was not guaranteed by strength alone, but by adaptation, ingenuity, and perseverance. Entire sectors were converted into mobile strongholds. Quantum memory lattices were deployed to anchor existence, stabilizing planets and stars against the tide of erasure. Human engineers sacrificed entire systems, detonating control collapses to redirect the null tide and buy time. Every action cost trillions of lives, yet every action delayed extinction. Other species, the last remnants of the galaxy's former grandeur, joined under the human banner. They were small, broken, desperate. Humanity did not lead with conquest but with organization. They became the coordinators of survival, merging alien technology with human innovation. Refugees entrusted their histories, their art, their knowledge to humans. "Remember us," they pleaded, and humanity remembered. The final wars lasted millennia. Battles were fought not for territory but for continuity. The null tide devoured all in its path, yet humans held the line. Fleets, both human and alien, formed massive matrices that functioned as living barriers against erasure. Star after star was sacrificed. Worlds were scuttled into the void to create buffers. Human minds, augmented and merged with artificial intelligence, became instruments of strategy that spanned light years. In the final confrontation, there was no victory, only endurance. Humanity became the anchor of reality itself. The null tide could not be destroyed. It could only be contained. Using themselves as living stabilizers, humans bound the unraveling forces, halting the collapse. Every human involved became part of the mechanism, their consciousness, their memories, their determination woven into a lattice of existence. When the dust settled, there were no more civilizations. The galaxy was silent, and the null tide restrained, but never gone. All that remained was humanity, the last witness, the final steward, the enduring flame in a dying cosmos. The last transmission from a dying alien species echoed across the void. "You are not like us. You endure." And they did. Humanity did not conquer the galaxy. They had survived it. They had endured where gods and titans had failed. They had become something far beyond ordinary life, the final custodians of memory, history, and existence itself. The galaxy, once full of splendor, now waited in silence. Humanity had earned a place no one had predicted, not by dominance, but by refusal to vanish. The final empire. Billions of years had passed since the last star had burned brightly. The galaxy, once alive with civilizations and brilliance, had grown cold and silent. Only one species remained: humanity. Humanity had changed. Flesh was optional. Mind were no longer confined to individual bodies. Some existed as pure consciousness, integrated into massive computational matrices that spanned entire star systems. Yet they kept their names, their histories, their stubbornly human identities. Memory was sacred, and humanity's purpose had become clear: to remember everything that had been lost. The final empire no longer ruled with armies or empires. There was nothing left to conquer. Theirs was an empire of archives, guardianship, and endurance. Around the dim remnants of once vibrant stars floated colossal memory vaults, each containing the art, music, languages, and knowledge of extinct species. Every world that had ever harbored life had its history preserved. Every civilization that had ever existed was remembered, not as myth, but as meticulously documented truth. Humanity walked alone across the dying galaxy, chronicling and safeguarding. They built observation stations at the edge of the void, maintaining the delicate lattice that held the null tide at bay. They stabilized collapsing worlds long enough to archive their histories. They carried the weight of 1,000,000 civilizations on minds expanded beyond mortality. And yet, they were not hollow. Despite the unfathomable scale of their work, humans preserved the spark that had allowed them to endure. They told stories to one another. They laughed in the face of entropy. They celebrated each small victory: a star preserved for another century, a language reconstructed, a song recovered. The last human guardian stood before the final archive, recording a message to whoever, or whatever, might follow. Here ends the age of stars. Here ends the age of empires. Humanity did not conquer the galaxy. We did not claim dominion. We endured. We preserved. We remembered. And in the silence of all things, memory is the last victory. Time itself continued its slow decay. Galaxies drifted apart. Black holes consumed remnants of the universe. And humanity remained, not as gods, not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as custodians of existence, the living bridge between what was and what could no longer be. In the end, the galaxy had asked one question: who would survive when everything else was gone? Humanity answered, not with power or pride, but with persistence and remembrance. They were the last witness, the final empire, the eternal flame in a universe of silence. And though the cosmos faded into darkness, the story of all that had ever been endured within the minds and hearts of humans, every civilization, every language, every dream, every song, alive, preserved, and remembered. When the stars whispered their last light into the void, humanity remained, not to conquer, not to rule, but to remember,